In this video, I talk with my buddy Apathettic about a bunch of different things that will help you out in Destiny PvP. Appa is an insanely good player and definitely worth listening to. We cover the current state of the meta and some of our favorite weapons, how to stay alive when playing in close quarters, and a bunch of tips to help you out whether you're just getting started or you're pretty experienced. Real quick, a bunch of you have been asking me lately about how you can support the channel directly, so I finally made a Patreon. I make these videos as my full-time job and I really appreciate anything you're able to contribute. There's a wide variety of membership levels with some pretty cool perks. The link to join is in the description as well as the pinned comment in case you're interested. I think the best way to start this off is just asking you about the changes for the last few months, especially all the things coming in Season of the Lost. So we're talking about changes to hand cannons, like the 120s getting nerfed a little bit, and shotguns getting nerfed so they don't have quite the same lethality range, and all the different things that they've done to the subclasses. How has that affected how you're playing PvP right now, and like what decisions you're using for your loadout and all that?
Yeah, so I'd say in terms of decisions I'm using for my loadout based on, changes to 120s and a lot of changes to things like pellet shotguns. Uh, I've started to use 140s primarily. I haven't used a 120 since they got nerfed, because I feel like 140s are just kind of the meta now in terms of hand cannons. Um, as for the rest of my loadout, since a lot of the pellet shotgun changes have come down, I actually haven't used a pellet shotgun since then. I've primarily been using slugs. And when Bungie initially started talking about some of these changes, I immediately switched to a slug to kind of build that muscle memory and change the way I play with the shotgun. Because with the pellet, you were focused a lot more on closing the gap and just kind of flying in. Wasn't so much about lining up the shot and making sure your reticle was like head level and those little things. So I had to kind of build that muscle memory for a slug shotgun and use that a lot more. And I feel because of that, I've been relatively unaffected by the shotgun changes and even the slide changes because I'm using a slug. And so it's allowed
Interesting.
me to be a lot more effective in the Crucible with that slug. And I feel like now it's even better because slugs can body shot for about 150 damage. So you like one tap them with your hand cannon. If you're using Ophidians on Warlock like me, you just quick swap to your slug and body shot someone.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've actually made sort of a similar change myself. I was using a lot more Chaperone recently, and I just feel like the way that they changed shotguns, it used to be so consistent to get a pretty deep one hit kill from, like, I don't know, 7 meters or so. And now with the extra spread, I feel like it's just so much safer to go for even a body shot with a slug and go for a cleanup. I mean, obviously you're going for a headshot ideally to get the kill, but like if you land the body shot, it's pretty consistent from significantly further range. So then you can either switch to primary or you can go for a melee or, like, whatever the situation calls for. But I feel like I've had a lot more success doing that as opposed to using a regular shotgun lately. So it's kind of interesting to hear you say that as well.
Yeah, it's funny because the complaint with pellet shotguns before, even before their nerfs and changes, was that they weren't consistent. But we still use them because the potential for that deep one hit kill was there, and they still had a low, they're much easier to use than a slug. But now it kind of almost seems silly that pellets were even as good as they were because slugs are so much more consistent. You know where the bullet's going to land when you're going for that cleanup. If you one shot someone, they run around the corner and you fly in for the cleanup, you can map them from pretty far, especially if, like, I use a Sojourner's Tale with opening shot, and it absolutely maps from far away. And so it's super easy to get those cleanup kills when you've already done a lot of damage.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was gonna ask you. So what's your like mini rapid fire tier list of shotguns that you're liking in the slug department?
So number one for me would probably be Sojourner's Tale because I love using exotic hand cannons. Like I love using Thorn, I love using Ace of Spades. So something like Duality, as good as that shotgun isn't really on the table for me. Or Chaperone, those will also be, like, if we're talking top slug shotguns, those would definitely be
Hmm.
up there. But Sojourner's Tale has probably been my number one. Like I have one, mine I'm using right now has moving target and opening shot, almost max range, has really great handling because the snappiness and responsiveness of a weapon is super important for me. And so Sojourner's Tale has been my number one. On top of the fact that you can throw Icarus grip on it, and so you can like fly in, and as you're midair, you're gonna be hitting like flying headshots, and so it makes for a really nice feeling when you're doing that flying slug headshot.
Yeah, that's awesome. I actually have a very similar role to the one that you have, and it's so fun to use. I really like it. I've mostly personally been still going on Chaperone because my favorite hand cannon is still the Palindrome, and then I also really like the Trials SMG, the Shayra's Wrath. I got like a really nice roll from trials a couple weeks ago, so it's been like my favorite primary recently. But I don't know, it's interesting trying all the different options right now. It's cool. Like I really like the way that they've shaken up the hand cannon meta, where I feel like you can use so many different ones and be really effective right now. Like there are definitely some that are still, I think, the best, but it's a really wide variety of what's considered usable.
Right, and the thing is, it's not that pellets are like terrible now. I just feel like slugs are just they really have that consistency piece that pellets lack. But shotguns like what the Fractithist is like still very very good.
Hmm.
Reese Walker is still very good. So kind of to that point, right? I think overall, just in the entire meta, I feel like there's a lot more variety now because you don't have the oppression of 120s. Pellet shotguns aren't super powerful. That's also allowed things like fusions to shine, which I haven't really used because I'm just this doesn't really vibe with my playstyle. But I really like seeing a lot more things in the meta versus okay, just Fellwinter's Lie and just Igneous Hammer, just whatever 120 is your
Yeah.
cup of tea. So the variety has really really been nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. Are you using 120 hand cannons at all anymore? I know you used to be a big Sturm user, but are you finding those like in your playstyle or pretty much just 140s now?
So I got killed by a Sturm in the Crucible the other day, and like I had like a tear just come down my cheek because I missed it. But I literally haven't used 120 since. I did try them, I think, initially when the changes happened, and I just got like so quickly three tapped by like a 140. I was like,
Hmm.
okay, I'm done. I'm done with this. But yeah, I haven't really touched 120s at all. I have been seeing in the Crucible, speaking of variety, more people using pulses as well. I mean,
Yeah.
because I've also been using the stag a little bit more, which I never really used before. And I know like Cakes was like the OG on the stag, but I started using that a little bit more, and I feel like that's also increased variety because a lot of people are as playing Warlock are leaning on the Rift playstyle a lot more, especially with also the buffs to Bottom Tree Stormcaller and the Arc Buddies all over the place. And so I feel like I see a lot more pulses, especially with Darkest Before as well coming back. I think that's also changed kind of the meta a little bit as well. I see a lot more pulse usage than in the past.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I've seen more pulses of each different variety for the most part. You see like some aggressive ones like Messenger and No Time to Explain from time to time. Vigilant Swing I still think is really strong. Like I feel like people generally sleep on that thing. I feel like it's so forgiving and so easy to do really well with it. And then like the new ones like Darkest Before, like you said, coming back. There's a lot of options right now in the pulse department, and I think that the way that 120 hand cannons got their range nerfed has opened up a lot of breathing room for different pulses to feel more effective. Because before with the 120s having like sniper rifle range, it felt like there's basically no reason to use something else longer range because you had the advantage of hand cannon being able to peek shot from beyond cover from 40 meters away or even further in some cases. Whereas now, if you really want that range, you have to go either like pulse rifle, scout rifle for the most part. So it's kind of opened up like a window for those to thrive, which has been kind of cool.
Yeah, on top of the changes they made to the damage dealing perks like Rampage on those weapons and empowering rifts like after a certain resilience, like they can't two tap. So now there's a lot of ways to work around the oppression that 120s used to bring to the entire meta. And yeah, just really has opened things up a lot. So it's been nice, and I really missed using like my Ace of Spades and my Thorn. So I'm totally cool with like 120s just like chilling right now.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that's been kind of interesting is on the other end of the range spectrum, now that shotguns got nerfed, I'm feeling myself having a lot more fun with SMGs. And I've also seeing a lot of other people using SMGs lately.
Oh, that's so true. Because I was playing Rumble the other day, and some of these guys were just using SMGs, and they were absolutely shredding me. Because the thing is, the SMGs at the right range flinch a lot, and now you don't have to worry if you're pushing with an SMG of getting absolutely mapped by like a pellet shotgun. Someone's gonna have to be really aggressive and really accurate with something like a slug, or if they're charging up a fusion, you're gonna kind of be able to hear that and kind of play around it. There's more opportunity for counterplay with your SMG. And so I think SMGs are way more viable. I know me, you, and Shadow are doing like cards of just using the Trials SMG,
Yeah.
which is something I never imagined myself doing because I'm just like hand cannon all day, every day. But I actually had a lot of fun. And, again, it just opens up the meta to try new things that in the past maybe you got punished a little too harshly for because certain weapons were just so out of their lane.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really fun trying to use different ones. Like I've been loving the Trials one. Still hunting for a good Iron Banner one. I think that's probably the best. The multi-mock is probably the best SMG right now, but just can't get lucky. Can't get a good roll. I've tried so hard. It hasn't been in my favor yet, but I feel like that one's really, really good. And I don't know, it's just I haven't used any SMGs since about season 3 was the last time I really seriously used them, back before before there was even special weapons, when the back when the Ikelos SMG was so popular. That was like the last time I really remember using like SMGs.
So long ago.
Yeah, it was so long ago. And like I mean I've goofed around with them from before, but like I feel like now with the changes to shotguns, like SMGs are truly like a really viable option. And it's crazy that just a small adjustment to shotguns made them feel so much more viable, because you have just like a little bit of extra room where you can backpedal and still melt someone before they can close the gap on you. And the timing on that is just, it's so finicky with like, if you're, just that little bit of a change that they made opened it up quite a bit.
Yeah, it's always funny when they come out with all these changes and you try to think about, anticipate how the meta is going to shift and change. And there's always things that like kind of come out and surprise you. And I think SMGs would be that one for me in this scenario, because I was like, yeah, like they'll probably be like, okay, people can use them, but I didn't think that'd actually be like relatively viable. Because again, I played people, and it's just so annoying when someone's like really good with an SMG and they know how to play their range, and they're really good at proccing the perks and like knowing when to be aggressive. There is definitely, I think, almost kind of like a skill gap to using an SMG, because it can be used very well and be very effective. And there's people who you can tell, they just kind of run in and spray with their SMG, and it's not as effective as maybe it could be, and they'll play their range right either.
Yeah, absolutely. So on a similar note, I get the question pretty often, is it better to use something that you're really comfortable with, or something that is like the meta best option? And I'm curious about your thoughts on that. Like if someone's a newer player and maybe they feel comfortable with a weapon that is considered by most people to be like a bad weapon. Mm-hmm. Obviously a good player can make essentially anything work to some level. But I'm curious what your take is on that, especially for newer players who may be getting comfortable with PvP and haven't put a whole lot of time in yet. Do you think it's better to invest the time to get good at the weapons that are considered the meta, or to like just use whatever you feel is the most comfortable?
I think where I would start is, if you're comfortable with a weapon that's considered not good, is one, how like not good is it? Is it like absolutely terrible to where you're just kind of holding on to whatever makes you comfortable about it, almost to your detriment? And if that's the case, I would want to understand, or like ask yourself, what about this weapon makes it feel so comfortable for you? And understand, like, is it a stat? Is it the handling? Is it something with like the aim assist on this weapon? And trying to find a weapon that is maybe a little bit better, that has a similar feel to that weapon. So you can kind of find that happy medium, because as much as it is fun to use weapons that feel comfortable, at the end of the day, if you're dead a lot of the time and you're just losing these weapons that are just so much better than the weapon you're comfortable with, it's not going to be really worth it. And you're going to be more frustrated than not going into PvP. So I would try to understand what makes you comfortable about the weapon you're using and what you enjoy about it. And then what are those traits, and where can you find them in a weapon that maybe is a little bit higher in terms of, the usability than the weapon you're currently using. So that would be kind of my opinion on it, because I know like people that, like, I love Ace of Spades, and one of my buddies, he used Ace of Spades for a while, and he's like, it just feels so weird. I don't really like it. I was like, hey man, give it a chance. And I think, and then once he gave it a chance, he now loves it. And I think that's the other piece too, is being patient, allowing yourself time to like build that new muscle memory with a new weapon. So that way you can actually see if you really do like it or really don't.
I think that's a really good way to approach it. And I'd say generally my advice would be very similar. I think that a lot of people get comfortable with something, and then it's like hard. It's obviously hard to make a switch, especially if you're a new player and you just don't have a lot of hours under your belt. But I think it's actually a really good point you brought up about like figuring out exactly why you like a particular thing. Like, for example, if it has like, I don't know, snapshot or something where it aims really fast, and like figuring out like what it is about that weapon, because there's definitely, probably other similar weapons if you search around enough that you'll like. But I also think that part of it's like, I don't think that anyone needs to be like a meta slave. Like, I think there's a lot of play styles that are viable, and pretty much all the way up to like the highest levels of Destiny play, you can be pretty effective with a wide variety of things. But if we're being honest, there are some weapons that are just better than others too. And so if you're trying to like become a better player, you can definitely become a better player with weapons that are underpowered relative to others. But you could also, like, do you really want to like make it harder on yourself, like when you could spend that same amount of time just trying to get comfortable with weapons that are like just kind of, undoubtedly better too. So it's an interesting thing to figure out.
Yeah, and I mean it's true. You're essentially handicapping yourself, and I think getting better can mean a lot of different things. So I think you can use a weapon that you're more comfortable with and maybe isn't as strong in the meta, but then understanding as you're trying to get quote unquote better, what specifically are you trying to get better at, and is focusing on using a weapon that makes you less comfortable or that is more comfortable but not as good, keeping you from getting better because you just can't stay alive because you're losing fights purely because of that weapon. Then to me, that's, hey, you know what? Like, this is something as comfortable as it makes me. I'm gonna need to get uncomfortable because that's ultimately what's gonna help me get better, is being uncomfortable and using a weapon that I know will get me better results.
I like that. Well said. So speaking of things that are underpowered, overpowered, do you feel like there's any particular things right now, weapon wise? Let's talk about first, and then we'll talk about subclasses that are overtuned right now, like things that you think need to be brought down to make balance a little bit more even.
I was about to just yell like Shatter Dive.
I was gonna say, I think that's the one that pretty much everyone will agree with at this point. But let's talk weapons first, and then we can mention abilities.
Anything that's overpowered weapon wise? Oh man, I mean, I don't know. I've seen people talking like here and there about like Ace of Spades,
Mhm.
and I don't know exactly where I fall in that because I feel like I have like a bias towards Ace of Spades because I just love it so
I do
much. I
too.
love when you get Memento Mori procced; it's just so powerful. But you can really tell when you have Memento Mori procced and you're using Ace, like you are very hard to beat in like
Mhm.
a 1v1 fight. On top of the fact that you always have your Raider ups, there's just so many advantages. Like I know you have to stow it and it goes away. I know Bungie likes to make decisions based off of like, cool, is there a cost to this? And with Memento Mori, obviously you have to get the kill. But Ace just across the board, like stat wise, everything is just so top tier. But I don't know if I would personally consider it overpowered. I don't know. I don't think there's anything weapon wise that I can think of at least right now. Maybe you can like suggest something and
Well,
I'll agree.
yeah.
But
So there's a couple ones that come to mind that I see people talking about, and these are not ones that I necessarily think are overpowered or underpowered or whatever, but
yeah,
just ones that I see people mentioning a lot. So first of one comes to mind is the Vex Mythic class, especially with the Catalyst.
interesting. Interesting. Vex, I don't know. Like it's good. I feel like it's really good, but I don't I don't know. I would be scared that if they nerf it, then it's gonna be not good at all. It's such a fine line to
Hmm.
walk. And I feel like it's very good, but I don't feel like it's to the point. I feel like if anything, people get confused with something being annoying and being overpowered. Like Vex Mythoclast is annoying and it's good, but I don't think it's overpowered. I feel like sometimes it can feel overpowered because it's just like peppering you and it's just an annoying weapon the way it like kind of impacts your character.
Hmm.
But I don't know if I would think it needs a nerf necessarily.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that. I feel like I don't know if maybe it needs something or not. My hunch from using it myself quite a bit and then also playing against it is that it is very good, but it also has the limitations of auto rifles in this game. And I feel like any automatic fire thing that's not basically an SMG that allows you to melt someone at super close range, it's going to have to deal with other weapons that can peak shot. And the higher up you go in the skill ladder, the more that becomes a thing. Where if you're running around 6v6 and everyone's just kind of doing whatever, it's not that big of a deal. But when you start playing like higher level trials and competitive whatever, the ability to like time your peaks like that together and use cover to minimize the amount of damage you're taking while having the maximum outgoing damage, it's just a really core part of the game. And in other games like Call of Duty, Counter-Strike, whatever, where there's a faster time to kill, stuff like automatic weapons can potentially kill in still like one headshot with an AK in Counter-Strike. So it's like kind of a different thing. But in Destiny, it takes a lot of hits to get a kill. So when
Yeah.
you have to be consistently putting yourself in danger to get that damage out, weapons that can burst that amount of damage like a hand cannon are just, they're going to be really strong. So I feel like it's kind of one of those things where you have to look at it balanced relative to each different section of the skill ladder, and then you have to make a decision if you're Bungie, like what are we trying to optimize balance for, because it might be a different answer at like the highest levels, the medium levels, and the low levels of skill.
Right, and I think there's also something to remembering that this is an exotic weapon that has gotten from the raid,
Hmm.
and so at this point, Bungie, made sure a lot of people had it before they made these changes. But I like that they went back to this weapon that's supposed to be as exotic, like a pursuit type weapon that you want to have to strive for, and made it better. Because before I didn't have it, and I still don't have it. I don't want to talk about it. But now that it's better, I want to get it because it would be fun to use every once in a while. So it makes me actually want to raid more, and I have been raiding more, even though none of my friends will actually tell you that's the truth. And it makes me want to get the weapon. So I kind of think there's something to that as well, of not diminishing what's exotic about the weapon.
Mhm.
And I think they've definitely made it feel more exotic and more like what you would think Vex Mythoclast would be like, without, again, breaking it. And you made a lot of good points about breaking like the damage that it's outputting towards you. And I think a lot of people, if you're constantly killed by Vex Mythoclast, really assessing like, why do I keep dying to this weapon? And it's probably because you're being caught out of position, out in cover, where you can't like break away from that damage, or I know we've talked about being one shot away from cover. You're not playing in that way. So then Vex is absolutely going to shred you because they have no way to kind of like stop that damage.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that pretty much covers. I feel basically the same way about it. So the one other weapon I wanted to bring up, because I've seen some people kind of like rumbling about it a little bit still, is Dead Man's Tale. Particularly, I think for mouse and keyboard players on PC, it's like still really strong. I've seen a lot of like people like Wallah, for example, using it a lot, and I think that, like, in my opinion, it's still incredibly strong. And I don't know that it's like necessarily overpowered anymore. I feel like it definitely was. I think that the changes they made helped a lot. But I was just curious if you have any hot takes on that, if you feel like it's like, because I don't see it nearly as much as I used to, but there's also a thing where when Bungie nerfs anything, like the community stops using it until it kind of like goes in the waves. Like we saw this with Stasis too, where like Stasis got nerfed, everyone stopped using it, and then now it's like Shattered Dive City again. So
yeah. No, I think I think Wallah is going to make anything look like absolutely broken. But but also I don't know, it could be that, because like you said, I haven't seen it a lot. But I think it's kind of the same kind of thing as Vex, where now it's still decent, it's not broken or unusable. Like that's been a complaint in the past, I think, when Bungie's done some of these passes, is like, oh yeah, it was overpowered, but now I just can't use it. And it's like, okay, like you want it kind of both ways.
yeah.
But I think they've done a good job lately of like just tuning things back and then kind of assessing. And so I think that's what they've done with Dead Man's Tale, and I think it's made it, again, still good, not overpowered, but it's just annoying, especially with the way it like dishes damage, and especially if like you're trying to hip fire and things like that. And I think also the play style that the type of person uses when they use that weapon is also kind of annoying.
That's true.
Because I guarantee you there's probably a rift in there, and then probably a stag as well. Like with any long range kind of loadout these teams have been running lately. So again, I think it's more of an annoyance thing than it is like it's actually broken.
Yeah, totally. I agree with that. Okay, so I don't want to go super deep on this, but just quickly talking about any sort of abilities that you feel like are overpowered. We mentioned Shatter Dive, I think we're when we say that we're talking specifically probably about the combination of Shatter Dive with all of the Glacier Grenade and things that make it explode like a nuclear bomb. So
yeah,
like I mean, I assume you agree that that's a little overtuned right now, to say the least. But
yeah, I would say so. Like Whisper of Fissures, I think, is probably the main culprit behind that. But even like outside of Whisper of Fissures, I feel like Glacier Grenades are really, really strong, just as a weapon combined, especially with something like Whisper of Chains, where you get that damage resistance.
Yeah,
I think damage resistance in Destiny is the next thing that Bungie's going to probably look at and see, like, how much do we really want this, and like how is this affecting gameplay? Because especially when you combine it with like the Stag and Whisper of Change, which stacks, a player can take a ton of damage. You're doing way less damage with headshots. You can't 3-tap with a hand cannon anymore. And so I'll be interested to see how Bungie assesses that. But I don't know if I would consider those things OP, but I feel like Bungie's going to definitely look at those things specifically, like damage reduction via like Whisper of Chains and like the Stag, and how that impacts play.
Yeah, totally. I agree with that. I think that there's a lot of issues to be looked at with damage resist, and it's like a Pandora's box of like what they want the game to turn into. It's like, do you want it to be like the trifecta of like typical MMOs where there's like a tanky thing and a healer and a damage dealer, or like it's like I feel like this game it's doing so many things well lately, which I really appreciate. I also feel like in some ways it's kind of it's still lacking identity of what it's trying to become. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a lot of elements of gameplay like that, like damage resist, like healing, that can have a huge impact on how the game is played. And I'm just unsure, like, what is the vision of what this game is supposed to be? Because that kind of, I think Cammy talked about this really well with Trials recently too. It's like it's hard to evaluate how good or bad Trials is right now because it's like hard to understand what it's supposed to be. And like I've had a lot more fun with it this season,
Yeah.
but it's, it's, I feel like it would be really nice if Bungie would have just a very clear vision of what the game mode is supposed to be, and that would help us as players understand if like that's something that we enjoy or not.
Right, exactly. And that's kind of where I am exactly with like the damage resistance. Like, okay, what is the goal with this? Like how far, like this could easily, become a slippery slope in terms of being the go-to kind of ability in the game or
Hmm.
like perk in the game. I feel like the other thing is too is like a player, sometimes it's really hard to assess like that's what's causing you to lose fights against a player as well. Because in the heat of battle, it's hard to stop and read the damage numbers you're doing on a player. And so I feel like that also makes it harder to keep track of in terms of its impact.
Yeah,
So it kind of
absolutely.
flies under the radar for, players that are encountering it.
Yeah, totally. Well, and especially like if you get used to like three tapping with a hand cannon, like you said, and all of a sudden you're dealing with
Mm-hmm.
damage. It's really an interesting dynamic. It changes things quite a bit.
Yeah.
Any other abilities you feel like need to be looked at outside of stasis
Mm.
and damage resist things specifically?
Stasis damages. I don't know. I mean, arc buddies are annoying, but I think they're fine. I like that they're
Hmm.
like more viable. I think it's really revived that whole subclass tree being bottom tree Stormcaller. Um, I could potentially see people in the future, like once it gets more use, complaining about bottom tree Dawn and how long the super can last and like
Yeah.
how insane the tracking is. Because I feel like that subclass is really underrated right now. Because just a lot of I feel like things like Shadebinder and just other and like Bottom Tree Storm are getting a lot of uh attention. But I feel like Bottom Tree Dawn could easily, with like one or two nerfs or changes to any of those subclasses, could become like easily top tier.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've seen friends of mine using it really effectively, like yourself, and I've seen Cammy do some stuff with it. But I haven't really feel like the masses have caught onto it, and maybe partially because like the bottom tree storm is so popular right now because of like
Mm-hmm.
the arc buddies and the the stag and everything. So I'm really curious to watch that one and just see if it picks up any steam over time, especially if there's nerfs to any other things that might influence that.
Well, also with how I mean, I don't know if you've seen this, but it also pairs with necrotic grips.
Yeah,
So when you
yeah.
do the burn and it pairs in necrotic grips, and you can like, if say if you're using something like Ophidians, you can quick swap to your necrotic grips and then throw your blades in Dawn. If you kill one person, you're gonna get the burn on top of the necrotic grip burn, and usually that alone will kill someone and cause another explosion. So it can be like a nice little, quick swap if you want to like play that way when you pop your super. So it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Okay, so changing topics a little bit, one of the
Mm-hmm.
questions that Shadow asked us, which I thought was actually a really interesting question, was about staying alive in close quarters. So I think you're particularly good at this, so I'm very curious to hear your opinion on this. But a lot of times when people try to play aggressively in in close quarter situations, they'll just end up dying a lot to getting outplayed by shotguns or whatever. And I've noticed when I've played with you that like it's incredibly hard to kill you within like let's say 10 meters. With the way that you use your positioning, you typically play Rift on Warlock or you have like the barricade on Titan, and it's just very hard to kill you. And so I'm
Yeah.
curious about any tips you might have for people on how to get better at close quarters play and staying alive a little bit better.
I think close quarters play is a combination of a couple of things. It's one, knowing your way out or your escape routes, knowing where you are in position to your cover. I think it's probably the number one thing. So where am I? Where's my cover? What do I have to work with? Like, is there any cover I can slide between as I'm trying to, close the gap on someone? I would say the bigger thing though is learning how to correctly assess your radar and assess how close someone actually is to you, and really just trying to make sure in mid fight, and this is not easy, is constantly glancing at your radar mid fight. I think that's something that is just a like built over time, like practice thing. There's not really, I don't think, any secret trick. It's you just have to get used to like always glancing at your radar. I remember in D1 when I was trying to get get better, and you're watching all these streamers, you're like, oh my god, I'm gonna play like that person, I'm gonna play like Pattycakes. And so I noticed they were always watching their radar, and so that's something when I would play. I would go into I'm gonna play for 3 hours. Those whole 3 hours, I would focus on constantly checking my radar and being like, that's the thing I'm gonna focus on
Hmm.
for this play session. So being very intentional about what you're trying to improve, right? We kind of talked about this like when we talked about weapon comfort, like what are you trying to get better at? And I think weapon radar awareness is a huge factor in my ability to be successful in close range fights because half the time someone's so close to you, and with how melees work in this game and the boomeranging and how hunters can jump and just all those factors, it can be very difficult to track someone depending how the fight's going close range and what cover you're around. So if I were to boil it down simply, focusing on your radar and trying to understand that, especially in close range fights, is going to be the number one thing to help you be more successful, because then when you come out of cover to engage someone close, you have as much information as possible of where they're most likely to be, which is going to minimize how long it takes you to line up that shot and get the kill.
One thing I would add to that is also paying attention to sound cues. I don't think that Destiny has like the greatest sound cues of any game. It's one thing I'd actually like to see improved, but
Yeah.
it's something that you can still pay attention to. For example, like you can hear the double jump sound pretty clearly especially if your
Hmm.
volume a little bit higher. So if you're in very close quarters and you hear that double jump sound, you can think like, oh well, there's a high likelihood someone is around the corner and also above me. You can that might be a hunter who's like double jumping up. It might be a warlock that you hear activate like their glide and they're gliding above a door. So there's all these little cues like that that could
Hmm.
potentially give you information that the radar might not specifically show you too. So it's really helpful to like use those in combination.
Yeah, and I think all those things, like close range fights, in my opinion, are all about anticipation. You're trying to guess where someone's going to be before they're there. And so using things like your radar, like sound cues, but even like game sense, right? Like if you hear a hunter jump, like you mentioned hearing the double jump, like if you play Destiny long enough, you kind of know like how long that takes for them
Hmm.
to fall. And you can, that again allows you to better anticipate in combination with the sound cue and the radar. So when you do engage or you slide out to take that close range engagement, you know pretty definitively where they're most likely going to be without seeing them at all. And so that's, I think the key is combining all those things together to really learn how to anticipate where your enemy is going to be. Because sometimes a jump hunter jumps over your head like mid fight, and you're like really like you're on top of them, and you have to like turn around because based on all the things we just talked about, they're going to land at a certain time behind you and where their head's going to be. All that stuff just takes a ton of practice.
So another thing that's kind of tangentially related to this is rift placement and barricade placement for Titans and Warlocks. So this is something that I think a lot of people who are newer to PvP, they have these class abilities, and Hunter dodge is actually pretty straightforward for the most part. Like you dodge, to get back to cover, or to like just be evasive and hard to kill. But I think a lot of people don't really know how to get a lot of use out of their rifts and their barricades. So you play both Titan and Warlock. Is there any tips that you have for people to get the most out of the placement of those? Because I think it's something that a lot of, especially newer players, could improve upon and instantly make themselves a lot more difficult to deal with.
Yeah, I would say the number one thing with that is placing. I mean, if we're talking, I'll start with rifts. When you're with your rift, you always want to place it near cover. Always want to place it near cover, and learning how, like, what's the radius of your rift, so that way when you place it, it's not like the whole thing is behind cover. You want like half behind cover, half like kind of sticking out, so that way you can play your cover in your rift and use it to like peek shot out of the cover and do damage. Uh, I think that's like the number one thing. A lot of people when they place rifts, they place them like way too far behind cover to where, okay, now you're just kind of stuck staring at a wall, or they place it way too far out and they're basically a sitting duck, and no amount of health regen is gonna keep you alive when you don't have any cover and like two people are shooting you.
Yeah, I think a lot
Uh,
of people don't realize how fast, or sorry, how long the animation can take when you're popping
mm-hmm.
that rift. And it's like if you're popping it in a lane where there's someone aiming at you, it's you're probably not going to survive. Like you're locked into that animation for quite a long time. So there's an art to understanding, and also things like when you slide into like placing a rift, like where you actually going to end up. There's a lot of little finesse around understanding what happens with your player when you do a combination of moving and placing those items. So that's
Yeah.
something that just takes a lot of practice, I think, to really get comfortable with exactly what's going to happen.
Well, and I think also you mentioned, right, the animation. It's a long animation, and a lot of people focus on that being a bad thing, like it's a con. And like It is if you're using it incorrectly. If you're popping it too late, it is a con. Because if the animation is getting you killed, that means you popped it too late. Versus focusing on using the animation and actually gather more information. Because when you pop it, you go into that third person perspective. You can kind of spin your camera around and see around corners and see, okay, where's the enemy, kind of setting up? Are they pushing? Like, do I need to switch to my shotgun? Like, what do I need to do here? Again, all tying back to anticipation allows you, again, anticipate what the enemy's going to do because you're just gathering more information. So thinking about that as well, don't just pop the rift and stare at the wall. Use the camera angles as much as you can, and that's something you can also practice. And that goes for Warlock and Titan, and even Hunter at this point, because it's all third person animations. As for Titan and the barricade, I think the big thing is not waiting to pop it. A lot of Titans, they wait till they're one shot to pop their barricade, and so a lot of times you get killed mid animation. So I think popping your barricade to not only keep yourself alive, but anticipate, like, if an enemy team is pushing you, like, okay, I'm outnumbered, I need to buy time. Like, understanding and having the game sense to understand that situation, and then pop your barricade early is super helpful. Or popping it, not even talking about the third party and the third person animation, but popping it just so you can look around the corner freely through the shield and just understand like how they're playing, where they're moving, to gather more information for your enemy team. You can for your own team, and give those call outs just by staring through, your barricade. Because Titans have the advantage of, if you have relatively even like tier 3 resilience, you're going to get your Titan barricade back very quickly.
Yeah, it's something you'll see in a lot of, especially if you watch like scrims and tournaments and stuff like that, like the really high level players. Titans in particular use their barricade really wisely to 3-peek around a corner, so you get that little bit of information. And then also, if you place it like right at the edge of the corner, it gives you that little bit of room where you can kind of peek into the lane and see safely without actually being exposed to a sniper or a team fire. So there's like a really like a sweet spot of placing it just to give yourself a little bit of extra information whenever you want it, before it goes away. And the other thing I think that it can be really used effectively for is when you're in a bad situation, you can use it to turn what would be like maybe a 1v2 or 1v3 fight into a series of like 1v1 fights, because you can kind of set the map in a way that you have cover that would not normally be there and use that to your advantage.
No, I love that. And that's something that I think is also underrated. Like, if you're taking a fight in front of you, like proactively popping your shield like to your left side, where there's like an open area, so it's another lane that could potentially leave you vulnerable, putting that shield up on like your left side, and then allows you to fully focus on the people in front of you, knowing that your shield is going to protect your blind side essentially. I think is like definitely like a veteran move that Titans do, because again, some people also hold on to these abilities way too long, not realizing how fast they regen.
Yep, totally agree with that. So on a similar note, there's the middle tree Dawnblade that you actually use really effectively, and I think that's something that a lot of players don't know how to get the most out of their well of Radiance. Are there any tips you have for players who are trying to kind of experiment with that subclass? I know it's maybe not the most competitive thing at all times, but it can be pretty fun, especially for 6v6.
Yeah, it definitely can be pretty awesome. I think when I think about using Well of Radiance, I think it's about knowing your role on your team, knowing like what your abilities do. You can use it more offensively, right? Like, you can hold your grenade, throw it at your feet, and get the overshield. But usually most teams are going to burn through that pretty quickly, and the audio cue for that is pretty loud. So most teams will also be able to prepare for that. So I typically, if I'm playing that subclass, I focus more on being like a support player and really just keeping my team alive and like team shotting a lot. And finding kind of my moments within that to, pop off on my own and do my thing. But a lot of your success is going to be tied to really supporting your team and like playing together and constantly throwing, those little heliorbs to get the overshield, and using it with something like Lumina, where you can, constantly be healing or empowering your teammates. I think makes for like a really fun, like little mini build. But I think that's the main thing, is knowing what your role is. I think people use Well of Radiance and they try to turn it into like this crazy offensive, like lone wolf subclass, but it's definitely not that. I mean, I guess in the right player's hands, anything can be, right? But I think the strengths of that subclass are really centered around team play.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Okay, so I have a somewhat controversial question for you, and I'm curious to hear your take on this, because I've heard various people talk about this in different ways recently, and it seems like people come on different sides of the fence. So how important do you think that movement is overall in a competitive setting, and where would you rank it compared to like aiming skill, game sense, team play, and obviously everything works together. But if you're strictly looking at movement, like some people will say that, oh, Destiny is a movement game, and some people will think, that's just one tiny part of Destiny. It's like not even that important. So where in the scheme of things do you rank movement with your character in comparison to all the other skills that are important to master?
I think I would probably rate or probably either number one or number two. Like I'm trying to decide like how much I value aim. Obviously, being an FPS, like kind of have to. But I think movement is so important because I've played players that have really, really good aim, but their movement is just absolutely terrible. And you can tell right away. Like if I'm playing a player before they even fire a shot, I can kind of get an idea and gauge their skill level based on their movement. And so that's why for me, movement is like the number one indicator for me of skill because that tells me you've been playing the late game for a long time and it indicates a little bit of game sense, like to get the feel for the movement in Destiny because it's very unique. Like even for Hunter, like if you're boomeranging off the walls and jumping around all over the place, that tells me you have a game sense for how this movement can be used and abused in Destiny. So I think high movement also ties right back into game sense, which I know a lot of people think is super important. Um, and then, again, if you have good movement, that's going to compensate for aim to a point, right? If your aim is like absolutely terrible, it's not going to matter how good your movement is. But again, typically, if a player's gotten to the point where their movement is that good, the aim is already usually there.
Yep, I gotcha. I think that that's a really good point that you bring up about basically using your movement to compensate for your aim because it's very true. Like
Yeah.
it's like there's different levers you can pull towards becoming a good player, right? Like you could just be an aimbot with no game sense and no movement, and you'll be pretty effective against a large majority of the players just because you literally don't miss a shot, right? But there are players, and you'll see this against, especially back when cheating was more of a problem in trials, where like a lot of good players could beat people who had aimbots because they knew how to use their movement in combination with the things we are just talking about with like rift placement and barricades and all that to outsmart them by using the things that were available in the game to beat them. And so it's like aim itself is I love aim training, but it's just one part of being a good player in my opinion. And so I don't know, I think that movement is one of those things where no matter what level you're at, you can always get better at it, and it's just always going to improve your game. And maybe I know a lot of people are not super up on like the stompies smash yourself against the ceiling thing, like which is kind of probably where the big controversy of it comes. But I feel like there's so many little movement techniques that can you can use to make yourself a better player.
Right, and again, that's something I'll be interested to see how Bungie tackles as well. We talked about what does Bungie want the game to be, how they want to play, right? And they've mentioned like nerfing things like stompies. I believe they've mentioned that in a TWAB. That a certain pair of boots need to be looked at or something along those lines. And I think we all know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But I think like, right, your point about the cheaters is like 100%, right? They're like, oh my God, he's headshotting us. But like the term, he's bot walking. Like, I think that really speaks to the fact that like movement, whether people realize it or not, is a huge indicator of skill. And it ties back to so many different things. And I feel like as a player, as you're trying to get better, for a lot of people, it's one of the things that probably comes last. But I think because you get in gunfights and you miss a shot here and there, and everybody expects themselves to be perfect, they go back and like they feel like their aim is the one thing that's messing them up. When it's probably what was their movement leading up to the fight, and what was the movement like during the fight that actually could be impacting them more.
Yeah, I mean the truth is that you can either hit every shot yourself, or you can give yourself a little bit more breathing room by becoming harder to hit yourself, so that there's a little bit less pressure on you to like hit every single shot, right? So like if you have really good strafing patterns where you're unpredictable, you're throwing in some crouches, you're using cover to move in and out so that you're not always exposed, that's going to make you so much harder to kill that you give yourself a little bit more breathing room to not hit every single shot and still win a lot of engagements. So it's a really good way to, mitigate potential. And it's like no one out there, except for aimbots, don't miss a shot. So like even the best players, if you watch tournaments and stuff, they're still missing bullets, right? So it's just, I think it's always worth it to try to improve your movement skill.
Yeah, 100%.
So on a, I guess, slightly similar topic, someone asked a really good question that I think is kind of cool. We were talking a lot about making the game fun by being really competitive and skilled at it, but how would you focus on just having more fun with the game when you're not trying to necessarily become like, the sweatiest trials player or whatever? Like I've been trying to explore a lot of different builds lately that are they're not really the most competitive thing, but they're just really fun to goof around with.
Hmm.
Do you have any like thoughts on that? I know you're a pretty competitive minded gamer, but any thoughts on like just kind of having more fun with PvP where maybe you're not trying to become the best player in the world, but just making builds that are kind of enjoyable to use?
Yeah, I think it starts with, setting the right expectations for yourself, right? Just like you said, hey, I'm trying to run these builds, and I know this build isn't super competitive. Cool, right? In your mind, you know now that like if someone kills you with, I don't know, an ace of spades, for example, and they three tap you and they're using Memento Mori and that's why they killed you. Cool, like that shouldn't upset you because you know you're using something that's not going to be able to compete with that, and you're doing it because you made that decision to try something different and try something you thought would be fun, and really trying to focus on the moments the build is successful and is fun versus harping on the moments where someone uses like something that's meta when you made that decision to use something less competitive, right? And I think it's all about getting yourself in the right mindset. I think that's totally the right thing to do every once in a while. And it's something personally I don't do enough. And every time I've tried like using, like the Trials SMG, I'm like, wow, this is so refreshing not using a hand cannon. And I think people sometimes don't do that enough because again, they don't want to go against the meta. But I think there is value just from a mental aspect of going in, trying to use something fun, you know, forcing yourself into this mindset where you gotta have to like relax a little bit and focus on the more fun moments and take Destiny for what it is and what it isn't. And at the same time, being understanding that there's going to be other weapons that may kill you just because they're simply better, and that's okay. It's all about focusing on the funner moments.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good approach. All right, so we have two more questions. First one is talking about the common mistakes that you're seeing new players making in PvP. So basically, I think we both come across players of a lot of different skill levels, especially like in your YouTube comments and stuff like that. But what kind of things, like if you're taking a new young guardian under your wing and trying to help them out, what are your like top, like let's say 5 things that you want them to focus on to become a better player?
I think the first thing I would recommend to them is I still really love Nomads. Was it the 2 second rule?
Mm-hmm.
Ascendant Nomads, the 2 second rule. That I think is like a huge problem for a lot of newer players. They get so tunnel visioned on one thing and they don't realize that they've been standing in the same place for like 15 seconds, which doesn't sound like a long time, but in Destiny it like really is. Um, and that everyone's kind of just shifting around you. So that probably my first one I would tell them is make sure once you engage to be constantly moving and never staying in one place for too long because you're kind of any advantage you did have in that engagement is probably slowly going away and you don't even realize it. Um, as for like a second tip, I would say probably playing near cover. I think for me, like that's part of the reason I find myself being so successful in PvP is because I'm always near cover, playing one shot from cover, like we've talked about in the past. I think is a huge thing. A lot of people they slide out and they basically give themselves up to the enemy team because they have no cover and nowhere to go when like we talked about, they miss a shot inevitably, like we all do. And so, what you're trying to do by playing your cover is just prepare yourself for the fact that what if you do miss a shot? What if this person does take a weird angle? What if they're lagging? All the different factors that could come into play. Playing your cover is going to allow you to compensate and have kind of like a get out of jail free card in those scenarios. So I think playing for cover would be another
Yeah,
huge one.
I would attest to that. You're like one of the most annoying players to play against in a 1v1 because you'll never give up. Like, you'll never give up your advantage. You'll always play right next to cover until you're winning the gunfight, and then you'll push or try to close it out. But it's makes it really tough to play you, and it's the hallmark of a good player, right? Is there's a famous Halo quote about that, but basically,
Yeah.
just like why take a fight that you don't need to until you have an advantage.
Exactly. And I think, that just ties into overall survivability because a lot of people will get so focused on, I want to get a lot of kills, I want to be aggressive, and, whatever the case may be. And focusing on your survivability, I think, is why that's so important. I think the next thing, if I was giving a tip to someone, was to really evaluate your stats. I look back at when I was grinding for like Not Forgotten back in like Forsaken, and it was super super sweaty to go into comp back then, and still kind of is, I guess. Um, and I remember I was watching like an old stream and I saw my stats. I was like, oh my god, like how did I even get this weapon? Like my stats were just all over the place, and it's just another way you're handicapping yourself. So trying to understand like what's like how stats work in Destiny, what stats are good. There's lots of tools out there like Dim, and I know Patty, you mentioned another one that was really good for optimizing your stats with the armor you do have. I think is another huge tip I would say that can again just increase your chances of winning a fight or winning a game. I think my next tip after that would go back to what we talked about earlier, radar, understanding Destiny's radar. Destiny's radar is a little bit different than other games. I think people come from Halo and they think it'll be like the same, but it's like very generous and very far. It goes very, very far. It also can like change hue based on someone's elevation. And so like understanding those different things and learning that game sense of like when your radar might be deceiving you a little bit. Because you still see a lot of people, they slide out and the person's like 5 feet away from them or 5 meters or whatever, and way out of their range. And so that's a sign that a player doesn't understand their radar yet. So I think that would be, was that my fourth tip?
I think that's 4.
Okay. No, I'm just kind of going. And my last tip, I would say try to find people that are equally skilled or maybe even a little bit better, and try to spend time playing with them and asking them a lot of questions. I think that's some of the way I've gotten better is playing with people like Patty, playing with people with Shadow, playing with people like Brave. Like I go on and on and on. And playing with them, like even if they're not necessarily better than you, like as a complete player, chances are there's something they do better than you. And so there's little things you can learn and pick up just by playing with those people. And also things you could probably share with them to help them get better as well. Because as everyone's probably heard, like Destiny's best played with people. And so that's the way you can really get the most out of like your experience in PvP and even PvE, and learn a lot about the game and get suggestions from people on like things they learned that can actually help you.
Is it friend game is the end game?
Exactly. End game is the end game.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think that one of the things that a lot of people try to like just get carried on things, and sure, that's like nice if you just want to get the loot and you don't really care about what is. But I mean, to me, like the fulfillment in this game comes from getting better, and you can definitely get better by like playing with people who are substantially better than you. But a lot of times, I feel like it's almost like if you're just starting your first business and you try to ask like Steve Jobs about how to get started back when he was alive. It's like he's so far like above where you were that it's like he might not actually have the best advice for you. But like if you're helping, you're playing with people who are just like a couple steps beyond where you are, their advice for you might be a lot more actionable than someone who's like just been playing the game for 10,000 hours, and it's like they have potentially a hard time relating to the problems that you're having. So I think it can be really helpful to play with people who are just like a couple steps ahead of where you are, and then when you get to that level, then you find some new people who are just a couple steps ahead of where you were then. So it's a really good way to kind of like slowly and steadily get better at the game.
100%, right? And like some people can do that through YouTube videos and watching their favorite streamers, and that's great. But nothing really gets getting to play with a person and actually spend time with them and talk to them. And just like I remember, a couple of weekends ago when I played, with you and Shadow, and we were playing Trials, and like Shadow called out, oh, he shot his 2 shots of special. I was like, oh man, that's actually going to be a really good call out now with the changes of special ammo, right? And so that's something that I, even as a very experienced player, wasn't even thinking about, hadn't considered. But because I played with Shadow and he called that out, now that's something that I've incorporated into my own game.
Yeah, totally. All right, are you ready for the most important question?
Oh God.
You have any tips for growing such a beautiful beard?
Oh my God. Is that question for you or for me?
I think that's for you.
I don't know. I feel like my beard gets like way more attention than it like even is like worthy of.
It's a nice looking beard. What can I say?
Dude, that's the king of beards. I mean, honestly, the biggest tip I could give that my buddy EMT gave me was you just gotta let it grow. You just gotta let it grow and understand it's gonna look a little. It's not gonna look nice for a minute. It's gonna look a little wild. But then at that, once you get like that good foundation for your beard, I can't believe I'm talking about this. Then you can kind of like trim it back and dial it back and really polish it up. But you have to accept you're gonna look like maybe like a little bit of a caveman for a little bit.
I like it. Time and dedication.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for joining me on this. This was fun to do a part 2. I'm sure people will enjoy it quite a bit, and I will link all your socials and whatnot in the bottom. Any last words you want to leave people with?
Just to continue to keep practicing, keep striving. I think it can be easy to be frustrated by different things in the meta, like we talked about things like Vex and DMT. But you'll find the more you focus on those things, the worse they make you. So I would try to focus on doing a root cause analysis of all your gameplay if you're trying to get better, right? If you die, asking the question over and over again, why did I die? Why was I in this position? Why was I out of ammo when I thought I had ammo? And really focusing on the things you could have controlled, and that's ultimately what's going to make you a better player.
Nice. I like it. Awesome. Thank you, dude.
Thank you, Patty.
I hope you guys really liked that one. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't yet, and let me know which tip was your favorite in the comments. If you want to see another interview like this one, I linked a full playlist of these in the description, as well as my most recent one with Wallah, who's definitely one of the best players in all of Destiny 2.